So there's a couple of things to keep in mind when you're mending a knit fabric. One is that it stretches, and so whatever you do to mend it or patch it is also going to have to stretch, or you're just going to rip a new hole in your shirt or your pants or whatever. Also, you're going to want to keep in mind what size of hole you have. For holes this size, which are literally almost no bigger than the head of a pin, you're going to do something different than if you have an actual big hole that you actually need to fill in with another piece of fabric. Something this small honestly probably happened either with cat claws, or I find that this is where the button on my jeans is and it tends to rub it, wear through it a bit more. So keeping that in mind, what we're going to do for these is we're basically just going to stop the holes from getting any bigger and kind of connect the edges. Knit fabrics will unravel, so you need to make sure that you're catching as many threads as you can when you're mending it so that those threads can't unravel more. You're almost thinking of it like tangling up the threads in the fabric so that they can't pull away from each other. So I've got my needle and my thread, and for this you're just going to do not a doubled thread, you're just going to do a single thread because you don't want it to be that big and that obvious. And also for these, we don't need to worry too much about the fabric stretching just because the holes are so small that even at maximum stretch, they're not going to go that far. And also, there's just not much damage that small space can do if it doesn't stretch. So we're going to start on the back, and we're just going to go a little bit outside the boundary of the hole, and we're going to just take very, very tiny stitches back and forth outside of the hole. And I do mean tiny. Honestly, those are too big. But you're going to take the tiniest stitches you can manage. If you look real carefully, you can see the individual like rows of the knitting. If I can make my camera focus properly. Let's try this. There we go. You can see the individual rows of the knitting, and if you can manage to just grasp under one row with your needle, honestly, that's ideal. So you're going to go under, and then you're going to go over until you get past the space with the hole, and then you're going to turn around and go back the other way. And again, basically what you're doing here is you're making sure that that little hole there can't continue to grow bigger. You're putting threads around it that are not going to move and unravel. And that's really all you need to do with a hole this big, because it's so small you almost can't see it to begin with. So if it weren't for the fact that I don't want the hole to get any bigger, it wouldn't matter at all. Also, you'll notice I'm doing this with gray thread. Typically, I would recommend trying to find a thread that matches as best you can. If you don't have a thread that matches, traditionally speaking, white, black, or gray, depending on the color of your fabric, will blend in decently. As you can see, this is gray on like a periwinkle blue, and it's not going to be invisible, but it's not going to be glaringly in your face. And so I finished that row. Now I'm going to go back again and just go over it, and I'm just going to jump the hole, and I'm going to keep going. It's basically just tying all of those threads around the hole together so that they can't pull away from each other and unravel into a bigger hole. And I've got a little bit of a bubbly stitch there, so I'm just going to pull my thread tight. You don't want to pull it too tight, because otherwise you'll just create a big old pucker in your fabric, and that's really not what we want to do. And my thread's going to tie itself into a knot. Just kind of tug at it. Keep in mind as you're sewing that if you get a knot here, The odds of it being a genuine knot are small because you didn't actually put your needle through that. So typically speaking, if you can just find which end of or which side of the thread needs to be tugged on, you can make the knot come out. Not always. Sometimes you have a brain fart and you actually do like put your needle wrapped around your thread or whatever, and then you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. But most of the time your thread knots itself. It's just kind of kinking, and you can get it to unkink relatively easily as long as you're patient and don't make it worse by panicking. We're just going to go and do one more row here, and then we're basically going to cross hatch back down. We're just going to do our row of stitches perpendicular to the stitches we already did. And that's just going to make sure that no matter which way the fabric gets tugged, the original threads of the shirt are not going to unravel from each other and make a bigger hole. So see, now I'm going to start going up and down instead of across. And now I would not recommend doing this for any holes that are bigger than a pencil eraser. Even might be a little too big. Any holes that are substantial. This, like I said, is about the size of a pinhead. If it were to have gotten larger, this is not how I would mend it. But because it's so small right now, I can do this and keep it from getting worse. And don't sew next to your pin cushion, guys. You will wrap your thread around your pins, and then it's just a headache. And what's happening right here is just that my thread got twisted. So we're just going to kind of tug it through, straighten it out as best we can. There's no actual knot there if you look. It's just twisting on itself. So we're just going to untwist it and pull. And there we go, all better. Now, if I were doing this without a camera in my way, I would be trying harder to make sure that the larger of the stitches were on the back side of the fabric rather than the other way around. Because if you look, this is, you can barely see it on the back, and that's because I'm working from the front so that you guys can see what I'm doing. But you would typically want to be working to make your stitches look like this on the back and this on the front. So that's my bad because I didn't think things all the way through, but just do it on the opposite side and you'll be fine. So I've got another knot in my thread that I didn't realize, and I just want to show you again, this is not actually a knot as much as it is a very tight twist. So I'm not going to worry too much about getting it undone. I'm just going to put my needle into the threads, and I'm just going to start kind of tugging it one way and another until I figure out, there we go. See, now I don't have a knot anymore, and I'm just, well, I've got a little knot there, so I'm going to just tug that until it pulls itself out, and then I'm just going to use my needle to keep the tension on it as I pull it through, and it's going to pull off because it's just having fun with me today. But there we go. See, no more knot. And that's basically what you want to do most of the time when you get a knot in your thread as you're sewing, is just take your time with it and tug at it different ways until it unknots itself. And if you can, you kind of want to go over under the threads you're going across, just to give it a little bit more of a tangle so that it doesn't undo itself. And if you'll notice too, I've got another hole right there. I'm just going to go over to there when I'm done with this and do the same thing over there rather than tying my thread off and starting fresh. I'm just going to go over there kind of like a travel stitch, which you'll see in a second. Okay, I've finished my little square of stitches over the first hole, and see, the hole kind of closed itself up, and this from further away is going to be barely noticeable. And now I'm just going to kind of do a tiny little running stitch over to this second hole, and we tied ourselves in a knot again and again. We're just going to create a little tension on that and tug it through, and all better. And we're just going to start our new crosshatch of stitches on top of this guy, just like we did on the other one, until we get past the boundary of the hole. Sometimes it helps when you're stitching to kind of put your thumb over your stitches as you pull them through to keep the threads from twisting up and knotting. If you look, I'm putting it kind of over where the thread enters the fabric, so that if it starts to twist, it gets kind of straightened out and flattened out before it hits the fabric. And right now the tail is what's giving me an issue. See? Now the tail is going to do things like that, and you're just going to tug it out, and there we go. And we're just going to keep going. And yes, I did just stab myself in the finger, and it's okay. You don't need all the layers of skin on your fingers. That was not medical advice, by the way. This is also how I would repair small holes in like a woven material, say a plaid or a flannel shirt or a button-down shirt, things like that. Same basic principle. It's honestly going to blend in better on that kind of material because that's how that particular material is constructed. It's over and under in perpendicular lines, so it's going to blend in much better than it would on a knit. And now we're just going to start our up and down. And there we go. So now our holes are all patched, and it does look pretty bad this up close, but you got to remember what the scale actually is. This is much less visible than it looks like in the camera simply because of the magnification. And again, if I were to have done this in a thread that actually matched, you'd barely have been able to see it. So now I'm just going through to the back of the fabric, and I'm tying a knot. Instead of tying my knot in the fabric itself, I'm going to scoot over just with a few tiny stitches to some of my cross threads, and I'm going to wrap my thread around them, and I'm going to kind of use them to anchor my knot just to give it a little bit more stability. And let's see here. And one more time, just because there's nothing worse than the knot coming undone. There we go.